Navigational skills.
Well, thanks for that introduction.
The last time we were together, he and I were running, he was in Middlebury, we were running to a party afterwards.
Right.
Yeah, 5 miles south. So Steve Terry's house, right? So we did that. Hey, we don't need too much of an introduction for Peter, but I do want to just go over a couple of things. And that is, he was elected in 2006, so it's been 12 years as congressman.
It's been a while.
It's been a while. So congratulations. Thank you, Peter, for those years of service. Before that, just so you all remember, he was Senate Pro Tem in Vermont from 2003 to 2007. He served several years as state senator from Windsor County, 2 stints, 1980 to 88, and again in 2002 to 2006. Prior to that, he graduated from School of Law at UC Berkeley back in 1973. I was in San Francisco that year as well. And he formed his own private law firm in Windsor County after college and served as a public defender in those early years. Just some things that we forget about our congressman. Thank you for all that service. In Congress today, he's a member of 3 House committees: Oversight and Reform, which is pretty important, Oversight and Reform, Energy and Commerce, and the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. All pretty big, important committees going on in today's environment up there. Also, he serves on several subcommittees, half a dozen or more, actually 8 or 9, including intelligence, commerce, manufacturing, and trade. So those are, just to frame the discussion. I was going to mention that we were going to have, that the purpose of today's forum is to listen to hear what Congressman Welch has to say, tell us kind of what the first-hand account of what's going on in Washington, and to have us not take too much time in our presentation and questions. But I don't see any F-35 protesters in the group or anybody that's going to hog the microphone, so I think it'll be a pretty calm Q&A session after this. He's going to talk to us 20 minutes, maybe 15, 20 minutes, and overview, and then we'll have questions from the floor. Okay? Without further ado, here. We're going to introduce James Finn, who's also up here. He's the managing editor at the campus of the Middlebury College newspaper, and we're together going to moderate the Q&A session afterwards. So, all right? Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so the first is an apology and explanation. Angelo gives me this introduction that I'm on all these important committees. So how is it that I leave in time to be here 20 minutes early and get here a half hour late? All right? And here's what happened. I was in Bethel meeting with somebody, and I got up to leave. And normally when I come over, I go on 107. But I was in the middle of Bethel, and instead of realizing that I had to go back, I just kept going forward. And I was in Randolph enjoying a beautiful day before I realized I'd made a mistake. So I trusted Google, which sent me even more north. And then I started getting nervous. And then I lost service. And I decided to turn around. And the first person I asked about how to get here from where I was said, "You can't get here from here." No, but here's the thing. He wasn't kidding. So then I decided I've got to go back to the way I know. And I stop in this slaughterhouse. And this guy kind of just is amused when I say, "How do I get here from here?" And he says, "You got to go to Camp Brook Road," right, which is a way I normally go to come over Bethel Mountain Road. But he tells me it's closed, right? But he says some people are getting through. I decide I've got to take a shot to get through, because otherwise I have to go all the way back 107. So I go over. And it's 8 miles, from when you begin to when you get into Rochester. But at 6 miles, it was closed. So I go around the signs, and I thought those signs were advisory, not necessarily. This is true. So I had a local traffic guy get through, right?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden I come up, and there's this gigantic, a steam shovel, and then there's these big trucks and others. And I get out, and this guy's name is Corey Tatro, and I said, look, I am at your mercy. I've got people waiting, and I can't go around. Is there any way I can get through it? So this was so cool. He talks to 3 guys running these big machines, and they all pull a little aside. And then one guy there were big rocks on the road. He kind of takes that bucket and just brushes them aside, like he's using a duster. So they let me through the big construction with all the vehicles, and here I am. So I apologize for being a half hour late, but thanks to Corey Tatro, I'm here, because otherwise I'd still be, only in Vermont. Yeah, but thanks so much for coming. And Angela, thanks so much for the Addison Independent doing this, because, it really is very serious times. What's going on in Washington now? It's very serious and very dire. Because what is in contention is the guardrails of democracy. That's what's in contention. Generally, when I've been having forums in all the years I've served in Congress, we've had heated debates about health care and what's the right way to go. And some Vermonters really were upset about Obamacare. I was a strong supporter, but we were arguing about health care. We had a lot of folks who were arguing about the Iraq War when I first went there. Some who were for it, I was very much against it, but we were having a debate about the Iraq War and the U.S. foreign policy. And of course, we've had a big debate about climate change, which I hope is starting to change. But when I first went to Congress, and the Democrats were a majority, we passed the Waxman-Markey bill in the House. We didn't quite get it through the Senate, and had that gone into effect, it would reduce carbon emissions by 80% by 2050. But then it got a real roadblock in the Senate, and was one of the reasons why the Democrats lost the House. And however disappointed you were about, for me in that case, not winning on that issue, or however excited you were that we did finally make some significant progress with the Obamacare health care bill, the debate was about things that were of serious consequence to the people of this country. And we had serious disagreements, but it was about issues that affected the livelihood and the well-being of citizens. With this new president, what's in doubt is our respect for the courts and their independence. What's in doubt is our bedrock commitment that people are equal and entitled to be treated with respect regardless of their religion, regardless of their country of origin, regardless of their ethnicity. And those are being challenged constantly. And it started, of course, with the campaign to Mr. Trump and the way he announced his candidacy, calling Mexicans rapists. And it's continued since then with, with an assertion that journalism, which is something that's absolutely critical for a lively democracy, is all fake news, where there is an assertion that judges who decide against the administration did so because they're, quote, Mexican. It is us completely ignoring the responsibility we have to try to create partnerships with other countries to work with us to assist in security issues, to assist in climate change. So those fundamental tenets of democracy, equal protection under the law, equal respect for all people, regardless of who they are, the importance of institutions as what's required to carry on democratic values, the free press, independent courts, respect for checks and balances, where the House and the Senate have their job, where the President has his job, where the courts have their job. All of those things are being challenged. And that's the aspect of what's going on now that I find of most concern. And, the thing I notice as I travel around Vermont, it's what you notice talking to your neighbors. There's kind of a low level, and sometimes more than low level, anxiety about the world we're in. Because, you know, it's one thing when you're having a debate and you don't really understand how somebody can think that way about climate or about healthcare or, you know, what we're doing in Iran or Iraq. But you know that person you're talking to is going to be there for you if you have a problem, your house is on fire. You know that person is going to be there if somebody is trying to steal your car. You know that there is going to be restraint in respect. And what I'm seeing as I talk to Vermonters is that's kind of up in the air. You know, we're lucky in Vermont because we do continue to have a vital democracy. And we have a tradition of enormous mutual respect. And we have a tradition of a two-party system where there's restraint. Just because there's a Democrat or a Republican in the governor's office, you won't go farther than what the norms that we've established through the people who came before us, and we try to respect. We'll accept and respect those norms. And that's the aspect of what's going on in our country that I find the most alarming. Now, what do? Trump is Trump. He's not going to change. And what I have taken on as my responsibility in the House is to try to do the work of the House. And that's focusing on issues as hard as it may be. You know, we've got a Democratic majority in the House. We've got a working majority. We've passed legislation that, of course, runs into the McConnell Senate, where it's a kind of a just say no deal. But my view is that everything we can do legislatively in the House that addresses concerns of everyday people becomes a platform for us after the next election in the hopes that we're able then to move forward on it. And I think we've got to show that we are about legislating. So the Violence Against Women Act, bringing down the cost of prescription drugs, climate issues. You know, one of the first acts we passed was to have the United States get back in the Paris Accords. Now, we have a long list of things we've done that most Vermonters would approve of. They're not publicized because they can't compete with the tweet storm of the president. And of course, they run into the McConnell Senate. And on that, you know, what Senator McConnell did, you may remember this, when Barack Obama was elected, and then there was 2 years that Senator Reid was the majority leader, and then the Republicans took over and McConnell was the leader. He said the definition of his job was to guarantee that Barack Obama was a one-term president. And I was heartsick at that. I mean, I was angry, but I was heartsick because in politics, you do have the rough and tumble of the election. But when the election is over, you go from competition to cooperation. Because the job that all of us have is to try to make progress for the American people. And what's happened now is we've got President Trump, and Senator McConnell defines his job as trying to guarantee that Donald Trump is a two-term president. Okay? So you're not going to, we should be doing our job. And sometimes we'll agree with the president, sometimes we won't. But it shouldn't be a definition of a job where the United States Senate, an extraordinarily important institution in our government, is a servant of whoever the incumbent president is. So that's the challenge. And that's, in a way, the bad news. You know that because you see it. The good news is, and again, this is what I see so much traveling around Vermont, but you see it in your neighborhoods. People are embracing the importance of doing what they can locally. They know that they've got to build community from the ground up, from where they are. And they're doing what they can to reinforce the absolute essential personal qualities of mutual respect and consideration and commitment, along with doing what they can in local institutions. It might be the local bank or the volunteer fire department. But the solid work that's being done right now is in local communities. Our state legislature, I think, has done a good job focusing on practical things. And that good work, in my view, is going to help get us through what's a really dark time in Washington. Now, sometimes people ask me, Peter, how do you do it? You know, and it's said with a certain amount of sympathy. You know, how can anybody be down there? You know what? How can you do it? How can these young families who are trying to figure out how they're going to get their kids the education they need? Or are they going to take out a second mortgage to try to help with college education? Or what are they going to do about retirement? Or can their son or daughter have any shot at staying in Vermont and finding a job where they can make it? You know, those are the real challenges. The job that any of us in public office have is to try to have public policies in Washington that help you back home be successful doing what your work is. And there is so much that we could be doing to make progress. And in the doing of it, we would feel better about ourselves. Just think climate change is an example. Look at the energy that young people have. There's going to be this Climate Day of Action, a climate strike. It's led by young people. And you know what? Why fear climate change and then put your head in the sand as opposed to accept the challenge and understand that in facing the challenge directly, you actually can create jobs and you can create incomes and you know you can feel better. Because what I notice in my life, and I think I've seen it with all kinds of people, you get a big challenge, you get a big problem. If you get up and start trying to deal with it, taking a step at a time, you feel better. You're on the road to progress, and it creates the opportunity to have a good community because you're doing it with other people. So we've got to keep at it. This is a tough time, but I really value the opportunity to be your representative in Washington and try to do what I can every day to bring Vermont values to Washington. So let me stop there. Let me apologize again. You know, our office is, I'm in big trouble with you. I don't know, but if I'm not in trouble with you, I'm in trouble with my staff. Because we are on time, except when I'm driving. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me ask the first question.
Yeah.
It's just on the issue of impeachment, you voted a month ago.
Right. We didn't vote. But
you sent out a notice that you'd be in favor of that process. Could you just explain your perspective on that? And also answer me is the impeachment process broken? Because if it can't go forward under these circumstances, when could it ever be used?
Well, first let me explain my position. I changed my position, and I'll tell you why. But the issue of impeachment is obviously a huge question in a democratic society because it's very, very risky and dangerous, and there can be collateral consequences when there is a legislative removal of a person from office who's been elected by the people. I mean, a bedrock principle in our government is to respect the outcome of an election. Now, our founders did include a provision in the Constitution to allow for the removal of a president or others in office for, quote, high crimes and misdemeanors. So it's a tactic that it's a decision that should be made, I think, or an action that should be made with great reservation, but not ruled out categorically when the Constitution says that's what should be done. The issues for me, what ultimately changed me, because I was always concerned about the obstruction of justice issues. And if any of you have read the Mueller report, there's at least 10 examples of obstruction on the part of the Trump administration, the president, and his associates in trying to interfere with the Mueller investigation. In obstruction of justice, we saw that with Nixon, is a serious offense. Second, I've become increasingly disturbed that the president does not have any respect for the constitutional doctrine of separation of powers in equal branches of government. If it is the responsibility of Congress to do oversight for Democratic or Republican presidents, there has to be some cooperation on the part of the administration to provide evidence to Congress, documents, witnesses, basically to answer some questions. And what we've seen by the Trump administration in a way that's unprecedented, there's always been tension between the legislative branch and the executive branch on oversight, is a complete and absolute rejection of any responsibility to provide the Congress with the documents and the witnesses it needs to do oversight. That's a significant challenge to our constitutional order. And the third thing, and this is what was gnawing on me, was when the president announced for re-election, it became clear that he was going to double down on his racist, white nationalist remarks. And I have just been running into so many people who are feeling such pain about being vilified on the basis of how they worship, on the basis of their ethnicity. And above all else, the President of the United States, our leader, has a duty to all of us to try to bring us together. And what the President has made a clear decision to do is to operate politically by division. And I think that's very threatening to the future of our democracy. So that is when I said I would support impeachment. And let's put this in a context because we all know the reality. Whatever the House does, and members individually are saying what they think, it'll ultimately be the Speaker that has the biggest say in whether that moves forward. And it's in a context where even if it happened in the House, you're going to have Mitch McConnell in the Senate with a 2/3 majority of Republican senators who won't do it. Does that mean I shouldn't say where I stand? I felt I had the obligation to you to tell you where I stand, even if I can't give you a roadmap where what I support will be achieved, okay? So that was my position, and that's why, Angelo. And secondly, the way to proceed, we've got to do our legislative work. There is a presidential campaign, and that's going to take over. But meanwhile, as the impeachment issue gets, more and more members get involved in deciding what they want to do, and Speaker Pelosi contemplates what the right course is, we've got to do our legislative work. I have some optimism that we may actually make some additional progress on bringing down prescription drugs. I mean, every day in every way, what are practical things we can do as legislators to try to make the lives of Vermonters better? That's the bottom line, day in and day out for me. So yes, I support impeachment, but it's not by any means a substitute for doing legislative work.
I will open it up to questions from the audience.
Yes.
I understand what you're saying, and I'm with you, and I'm really glad that you came to the conclusion that you came to on impeachment. It really gave me a relief that my rep is representing me.
Right.
But even if the House does their thing, we have to do this for democracy. We have to go forward with this for history. Even if the Senate and Mitch McConnell, even if it doesn't happen or it happens on the last day of his presidency, we have to show that we try to do the right thing for our country.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. You know, here's do doing something because it's right is usually a pretty good reason to do it, right? So thank you. Here's what's really at stake for us. This is even more important than impeachment, yes or no. It's defending our democracy. That's what we have to do. Impeachment may be a means of attempting to do that. But the prize here is not impeachment. The prize is preserving and protecting our democratic form of government. You know, and that's what I hear a lot of pro-impeachment people saying. They understand that the ultimate goal here, it's not to settle scores with President Trump, it's to protect your democracy and mine. So thank you. Yes?
Do you see any crack in the Republicans that they might think of the people of this country and center themselves and step up and be brave and stiffen their spine?
You know, it's pretty discouraging. I mean, all of us from Vermont.
But you worked across the aisle.
Well, you know, I was going to say, you're Vermont. The seat I'm in right now, Jim Jeffries was in. I mean, he's a wonderful man, right? Bob Stafford had my job. You had George Aiken in the Senate. I mean, we've got a tradition of these extraordinary Republican leaders on the environment, on civil rights and civil liberties, you know, that we are all proud of. What I'm seeing with the Republican Party right now is it's a different place than it was. You know that. Donald Trump managed to take it over, and it's really being redesigned in his image. And some people spoke out. You know, Jeff Flake was a good friend of mine. He was a colleague in the House, and then he went to the Senate. He got attacked by Trump, and he's out. And you can go down a list of people where, in fact, when they spoke up, they were exiled or defeated. And I can attest to significant discomfort among many of my colleagues, but here's the reality. A lot of them are in these gerrymandered districts where 80% of the people in the Republican Party, or who vote in the primary, support enthusiastically Donald Trump. Okay? So that's what we're dealing with. Now, there's a lot of individual Republicans that do really wonderful things. You know, last week I had breakfast with Senator Grassley, you know him from Iowa. He and I don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, but he's been a fantastic champion of consumers. And in the Senate, and this is a real good example of the hope we can have, he's the chair of the Senate Finance Committee. And they had prescription drug legislation that he was pushing that would significantly provide savings, $150 to $200 billion over 10 years. And he defied the Republican Senate and passed that with only 3 of his own colleagues voting for it in committee and all the Democrats voting for it. And it was interesting to me what he said. He said, Peter, he's been a chairman of many committees, a very distinguished man. He said he's never brought a bill out of committee where he didn't have near unanimous Republican support. And that's what a chair tries to do. But he said, I've been going to these town meetings. He goes to town meetings all around, and all the people talk about prescription drugs. So he felt we had to do it. He was mystified why his colleagues didn't join him. So, you know, the election is really going to be the signal. It's got to be a verdict by the American people, or a judgment by the American people that they value democracy, mutual respect, restraint, respect for institutions. Yes.
So I guess I'm asking you this question as a lawyer. You go forward with impeachment or with trying to get materials from the government and they resist, and the next step is to go into the court system for a battle there. And the court system has been increasingly stacked with people who were appointed by the conservative groups that have control over the judicial process. And what's the danger of actually creating damage to democracy by getting bad decisions when these things get referred into the court system? And do you have to weigh not fighting some of these battles because you're afraid what the courts will do when it ends up there?
Well, I have that fear, and of course, you're absolutely right. The United States Senate, ask Patrick, is not taking up any legislation. The only thing it's doing is trying to get right-wing judicial judges appointed. That's all it's doing. So there is a risk. In fact, you just saw a decision by the court that is letting the Trump new policy on not allowing asylum seekers to even show up at the border and ask for asylum. That's being upheld. It'll be reconsidered. As far as do I take it into consideration, I actually don't think we can all that much because there's a legislative responsibility. We have to do what we can. We can't court shop. But I want to acknowledge that there is a risk of what you say. We could get bad decisions. The fact is we've gotten some bad decisions from the Supreme Court. And in my view, it's that the court has become far too political. And the real linchpin on that was when, again, your good friend Senator McConnell denied President Obama the opportunity to appoint his nominee to be considered when there was a vacancy and said there's an election coming up. Well, there's always an election coming up. But that's what I'm talking about with the norms of democracy. He can do that because the way it works in the Senate. He solely decides whether a bill comes up or doesn't. Something we ought to take a look at. But when there is restraint, you don't do it just because you can, because you understand that there are collateral consequences to that. And the collateral consequence to these overreaching actions are an erosion of confidence and trust in the democratic government itself.
Congressman?
Yes, sir. Sorry, go ahead.
I have a question for you. So, speaking about the court system and the Supreme Court in particular, you have been an outspoken critic of Brett Kavanaugh in the past. And over the weekend, the New York Times reported on this new allegation that came out about him raising some questions about the possibility of impeachment that some of the Democratic presidential candidates voiced. How likely is it that a Supreme Court justice like Kavanaugh can be impeached, and how will that process unfold?
I don't believe that's going to happen. I mean, what happens out on the presidential campaign trail, I think, is candidates expressing, their outrage. But Kavanaugh went through this, and in a very partisan vote, he was confirmed, much to my disappointment. But the fact that much of what is being talked about is totally consistent with what was presented, with maybe more examples. I'd be very surprised to see there be in the McConnell Senate any serious possibility of resurrecting that hearing. And that's not to say that he should be there or he should have been confirmed in the beginning. But if you're asking me, do I think there's going to be a change now because of the New York Times stories with Senator McConnell as the head of the Senate? I don't think so.
So I understand that the executive branch is responsible for waging our foreign policy, but I'm very concerned about what's happening with Iran. And I'm wondering what the House can do to interfere, to stop funds from flowing to the, anything to stop what seems to be rapidly developing into a military situation.
Well, first of all, thank you for that. Number one, in the defense bill, we included binding legal language, that there can be no military strike against Iran without approval by the United States Congress. The Congress has abdicated so much of its authority on the question of going to war. And if there's a military attack on Iran, unilaterally decided by the president, that would be in violation of what we passed in the House Defense Bill. Now, the Senate hasn't passed that bill, so we run into the division within the House and the Senate. But I'm totally in agreement with you, and I'm extremely alarmed by it. This latest thing is obviously quite serious, the attack on the Saudi oil production. And who knows exactly what happened? We don't know, but here's what we know. There's a proxy war going on there. We've got a president who got out of the Iran deal and now says he wants one. He's made it very unstable. And instead of taking advantage of what was accomplished, he's ripped it up. Second, we've got a president who's totally supporting an outrageous government in Saudi Arabia. I mean, they are carpet bombing the Houthis in Yemen. I mean, there have been bombs that, and by the way, this happens with U.S. support, that have devastated hospitals, landed on schools and school buses and weddings. So, you know, is it a surprise that there's a counterattack? I don't know who did it or how. But what I know is when we have a foreign policy where anything goes for Saudi Arabia, and we give them arms, we refuel their jets as they're going off on these bombing missions. We look the other way when MBS sends his agents to kill and then bonesaw a journalist. That's outrageous. And the House is very much against this. And we can speak up and have. But unless we get, again, the Senate to join us, we're a bit of a stalemate. But it's a very, very serious situation. I agree with you on that.
So we're hearing a whole lot about the problems with this extreme partisanship in D.C. And one proven method of reducing partisanship is the single ballot primary. I'm wondering, what specifically are you doing to advance this idea or similar solutions?
Well, what I've been supporting, I'm going to come back and I'll answer you directly, but I want to come back to this quote, extreme partisanship, and put that in context because I think that's important. Number one, I believe that all congressional districts should be designed by nonpartisan commissions. All right? Instead of having the politicians draw the districts for their advantage, have an impartial commission draw it for the advantage of the voters. Because I think whether it's the primary with, that's the California system you're talking about, right? Yeah. You know, I would support that. I mean, in Vermont, obviously, it's a little bit different. But I think gerrymandering is the real issue. Because I think if you have these districts where there's Republicans and Democrats, and there's some balance in it, then the candidates have to convey to those voters that whatever their views are, conservative or liberal, they also want to govern. And what's happened is that in so many of these partisan districts designed to guarantee a Republican or a Democrat, and it's much worse, you know, in the last, you end up having primaries where it's the most extreme person running that wins. And as you point out, they come down to Washington and it's to burn the place down as opposed to govern, okay? Second, on the extreme partisanship, there's absolutely partisanship. We know it and it's really a problem. But what's got different? And as you said, I do reach out across the aisle because when you're talking to somebody just about the problem, not, you know, what their ethnic identity is or whether they have an ROD, but it's like when I'm talking to Senator Grassley about prescription drugs, he is responding to the people in his district who are getting hammered by this, just like I am. Or if I talk about the fact that we don't have high-speed internet, or we don't have good cell coverage, as I found out, you know, trying to take a road here that didn't exist. No, but when you talk concretely that way, you make progress, okay? But when you get partisan folks where everything is defined as a win or a loss for your side, it's a disaster. But what's different with Trump is that he doesn't have that much interest in governing. He really doesn't. And I'll tell you a story. I mean, this is different than Bush. You know, I disagreed with President Bush's tax cut in Iraq, but he wanted to govern and he wanted to put people in positions in the EPA and elsewhere to do things. Trump doesn't care. And here's an example. that was really chilling to me when I was first there. It was like March or April of the first year of the Trump administration. And the ambassadors from Canada and Mexico invited about 20 members of Congress to dinner at the embassy. And they had 10 Republicans, 10 Democrats. And the purpose was to discuss the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, okay? Remember, Trump said he was going to tear up NAFTA and we'd have a beautiful deal. So all of us in Congress, the 20 of us, R's and D's, we're all really interested because we want to find out what's going on. I mean, this makes a big difference for our farmers here, by the way. You know what I mean? Well, we get to dinner and get to talking. We start asking the ambassadors who are working with their negotiators, okay, the people at the table with the Trump trade negotiators, what's going on. It quickly becomes apparent that they have no clue what's going on because the administration won't take a position. It's not laid out, even in the privacy of these negotiations, what it is we want. So it became apparent that nothing was going on. It was Trump talking about a new beautiful deal and using it to keep pounding away. And that's happening in agency after agency. So that's what's different. You know, the only true north for a lot of the folks there now with Trump is the tax cut, which is really damaging to our economy, in my opinion. You know, $2.3 trillion added to the debt. And then, of course, you've got a president who's abandoned any commitment to fiscal responsibility that has been a bedrock principle of Republicans over generations. You know, he's the king of debt. That's what he says. So there are things we can do. The primary you spoke about, nonpartisan electoral districts, I think would really help. Obviously, it would help a lot if we could get rid of Citizens United and try to bring the money down, get corporate money out, okay? So those things are really essential to our well-being. Thank you.
Just to carry on that question a little bit, there is no gerrymandering in Senate districts. How do we start taking some of those Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan back so that we have Democrats?
Well, we get Steve Bullock to run for U.S. Senate in Montana. We got Hickenlooper to run for Senate in Colorado. You know, Stacey Abrams in Georgia would have been good, but we've got these presidential candidates who have had an ability to connect in these purple states. In Montana's a real red state, but you know, they're interesting people. They elect John Tester, who's kind of a populist Democrat, and Steve Bullock, who has been a very successful governor. So, and the other thing, in this, I criticize the Democrats for this. We have to pay attention to rural America much more. That's got to be in our DNA. And you know, I'm lucky because I come from Vermont, and so much of our state is rural. It has those small town values where it's not RD. I mean, a lot of people are fairly conservative. It's conservative with their money, but they're wonderful values in rural America. You help your neighbor, you're on the local fire department, you do what you can, you never complain, you take care of your family. And rural America is under an enormous amount of stress. And we should have a much more aggressive, engaged policy to help rural America. And I think if we show up and demonstrate a real commitment to the concerns of rural Americans, then I think we would have a shot at getting their trust and their votes.
Thank you for coming today. Appreciate it very much. One of the things Donald Trump said when he got elected was he was going to try to drain the swamp. Well, unfortunately, he's doing that and brought him over to the White House, which brings me to my question. It's obvious that with the Senate we have, we're not going to get Donald Trump impeached. And our only hope now is that the Democrats can get their act together so that we can get an election where someone gets him out of office. But what I fear is the time from election day to inauguration day. Is there anything that can be put in place to rein him in that time? Because he's a loose cannon, and what's going to happen in that 2-month period really frightens me. Thank you.
Thank you. But I'm unaware of what could, quote, be put in place. I mean, to some extent, here's the situation. He would be, he would be fully empowered to act as president until he isn't, okay, until the next president takes his or her oath. That's number one. Number two, the Congress that will be seated is the Congress I'm in. It's not the Congress that you elect next year. And hopefully that'll be significantly different. So I don't know what could restrain him. My hope is that, you know, he's had some good people in the administration that haven't lasted long. Think about General Mattis. But there's some very honorable, respected Republican voices that we would need in the event that the president went overboard to call for restraint. But I can't give you any guarantee.
We have to get him out. He has to get him. We have to get him out. We have to get out. We have to get him out. It doesn't matter. We have to do whatever we can to get rid of him. He's danger. He's danger to everything.
Thanks, Judy.
My concern is, pretty much like everybody else here, a loose cannon. But what I see is he's very methodical about what he is doing. And he's doing it in such a way that he ties everything up in the courts, he gets everybody, tied up, and then he switches gears, and then he does the next abominable thing that he can think of. And we all sit back and say, okay, we've got our senators, we've got our congressmen, they're gonna be able to stop this. I don't see anybody being able to stop this guy. He's a horrible person, we all know. But correct me if I'm wrong, but many years ago, there was a guy called, I believe his name was Adolf Hitler. He started off this way, very slowly, very incrementally. He's rounding up people. He's not doing anything different. And we sit here and we watch it go, and I don't see you or anybody being able to stop this guy. No offense.
You know, it's not an offense. You're expressing a very real and widely shared frustration, all right? And it's a result of the fact that the President of the United States does have immense power to do good and to do bad. And there are counterweights, like the House and the Senate. We're split. So you have a House that would stand up in a lot of cases, like we did on Iran. But without the Senate, it kind of leaves the lane open for the President. We've got the courts that are not, in my view, standing up for the independence of the judiciary and for the authority of Congress as a separate and co-equal branch. So your concern is very valid. And a lot of times people say, well, to me, Peter, why don't you stop it? Okay? Well, if I had the magic potion, I would. But here's what I want to caution you on. You can't give up and you can't get depressed about it, because you've got to act in whatever way you can to maintain the values that you believe in. It might be local, it might be doing something where you work, and obviously with your family. But you have to have faith that those acts, your commitment to your values day in and out, day out, incrementally, like the ripple in the pond, make a difference. So what I find a challenge is that I, as a member of Congress, can't make it just stop. Even Nancy Pelosi, with all her energy and effort and will, can't just make it stop. We can act as a House, and we can try to build the bricks of resistance to Trump and advocacy for our basic democratic tradition. But we've all got to hang in. We just have to hang in. Another election's coming up, and that's going to be really consequential. And I'm getting upbeat about that, as tough as it is.
Well,
but a little bit of optimist, and I'm thinking about an election where a Democrat is elected president of the United States, and there's that period of time in which Trump would have still power. But I'm also thinking about those senators who at this point are worried about keeping their job. And at the point where Trump is no longer a threat to them, some of them might be able to vote their moral conscience and act morally.
That's
to
right.
protect the government.
Right.
So that might be a light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, you know, politicians tend to pay attention to what their voters are saying. Nobody has accused too many of us of being brave, okay? So, I know with my Republican colleagues, they're under a lot more pressure than I am. You know, Vermonters, we're kind of on the same page here about the environment, about the importance of mutual respect. My Republican colleagues they represent people in their primary that are strongly supportive of Trump. But I think that if there's a verdict by the American people, that's really going to affect them. And keep in mind, by the way, in this last House election, which really was a referendum on the president, you know, the individual candidates, we had good candidates, but that was secondary. We went from a minority to a majority in a significant way, and we won over 20 districts that President Trump had won in the previous election. So that's an indication that people are having some second thoughts. But I think the dynamic you described could occur.
We all agree that we're highly politicized. I think this process started 10, 15 years ago. Senator Reid was significant in that process, but it's certainly been magnified by the current status. If the Democrats get back in, will they be able to return to debate and negotiation, or continue the divisive techniques which would be their defensive process?
Well, I hope that we return, as it's called, to regular order, okay? I agree with you about this. You know, it's not enough in a democratic society, pluralistic society, to be convinced you're, quote, right. In order to make progress, you have to have a capacity to honestly listen to another point of view and try honestly to incorporate reasonable suggestions into the final product. I believe that. You know, one of the proudest things that I did in the state Senate was when I was in the Senate and the Democrats were pushing for universal health care. You know, the emphasis on our side is generally about access. And we passed this bill that Governor Douglas vetoed. He was concerned about cost. But we came back the next year, and Governor Douglas and I spoke about this, and I was the leader of the Senate, he was the governor. And my point to the governor was, you know what, we're both right. If Democrats want access to health care, we have to have a sustainable way to pay for it. So your concern about cost, we somehow have to address. And we, in the next session, instead of being mad about our inability to make a resolution the last time, sat down, got to work, and we passed Catamount Health, which many people still to this day think was the best, most functional and expansive healthcare program we've had in the state. And it was a result of trying to do the kind of process that you're talking about. It made it more durable. You know what I mean? It's not just about winning. It's about having something that's sustainable, so that if I came out on the short end of the vote, but I felt that I really had a shot at being heard and my ideas were really considered, I'm not going to be bitter about it, and I'll have an inclination to try to make this thing work. So I agree with you. And as one Democrat, I would certainly adhere to your approach on that.
Thank you, Congressman. I thought that was a beautiful example, because my question was about, you talk about trying to hold in there until the next election. when we have issues that are so time sensitive, things like gun control and climate change, that we feel like we're solving today, tomorrow. Do you feel like you have to wait until the next election? Do you feel that because I'm from Connecticut, my senator, Chris Murphy, has been, many have called him naive for going to the Trump administration and trying to sit down at the table and try to get something done when they, very likely will not be willing to talk. But do you feel that that's impossible, or do you feel that you just sort of have to stick on your side and wait until the next election?
You know what? I would never wait. Any opportunity I had to meet with anybody, including President Trump, to do something that I would say to you is something I support and I think you support. And Chris Murphy's doing a great job. He is the leader on gun safety. His district, he was a colleague of mine. We got elected the same year. And that year, just before he went into the Senate, Newtown happened. I mean, what a horror, right? And he is passionate. And he's willing to meet with the president. And he's willing to say to other Democrats, look, we've got to make progress. We've got to get a start. So he's not trying to shoot for the moon. And I did the same thing with President Trump. He invited Elijah Cummings and I to meet with him at the White House about 4 months into his administration. Now, I don't go to the White House for social things, like they have a 4th of July party and a Christmas party. But for business, absolutely. I mean, you can't be in this business unless you're willing to talk to whoever it is you've got to talk to try to make progress in the things the people you represent need. That's the way it is. Thank you.
Just a quick question. When do you plan on endorsing a Democratic presidential candidate?
I did. I endorsed Bernie right after he announced.
All right.
Thank you for coming here. One thing...
Got any turkeys? I always like my
Pardon?
Thanksgiving turkey.
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
So one thing in your bio that wasn't mentioned is you ran for governor in early 90s.
90.
And against Governor Snelling.
Right.
And you came to our farm and had a debate with him.
I remember that. It was a beautiful, beautiful day.
Yep, it was a very civil debate. So, but my question is, it seems to me that power has concentrated too much in too few people in Washington, especially in the president, especially in the leader of the Senate. And essentially right now we have two people who are making decisions and leading our country. And I'm wondering if there isn't some way, and I think this has sort of been accumulating for years. It's not something that just happened with Trump. But there is life after Trump, and I think that we need to do something about this to disperse the power so that two people don't have so much.
Well, see, I think that's right. But part of the dispersal of power is strong institutions that do their job. I criticize us in Congress. We're Article 1. We're the first branch that's created. And when it comes to war-making authority, we've ceded that to the executive. That's outrageous. We should not do that. Or the judiciary, that is now really, the Supreme Court in particular, is just too attuned to what it is the president wants. They're not acting as the independent branch that they are. So institution after institution has to be buttressed. But the other thing that really has happened is that the corporate power has been consolidated. And, we've got a situation that we've been always proud to see Ken here. Think about the whole collapse of Wall Street in 2008. Well, the only folks that were doing the work after the collapse because of the incredibly outrageous stuff that was happening on Wall Street were our local banks, right? So why don't we have policies that facilitate local institutions where they're embedded in the well-being of the community as opposed to just the financialization of everything else? And what has happened in our country, we've never had profits that are higher. Corporate profits are way up, but the share of the profit that goes to labor has never been lower. Right? That's an imbalance. and all kinds of reasons, you know, weaker unions, globalization, but you can't sustain the middle class if they're working harder and getting less. And that is a result of politics and decisions that are made. So that's the big challenge for us, is how do we make capitalism work in a way where there is some shared gain for a middle class that is really under siege.
The discussion about getting democracy back for the people is very important, and you're part of it. I appreciate it very much. The other issue about making the earth sustainable for future generations, protecting the climate, is so important. So I just ask a simple question about where will you be on Friday?
Well, I'll be in Washington.
That's the climate.
No, I understand. Where will I be? I'll be in Washington. But I'm really glad that the Climate Day of Action has happened.
Some of us here will be part of the demonstration in Middlebury and other parts of the state.
All right. Good for you. Thank you. That's great.
That brought up a recurring question I've had for years. That perhaps all of the House members should go on strike on Friday and do something for the climate. I keep picturing, I don't know how many people, how many Democrats would do that. How many Democrats in the House would go on strike or get together and have a huge press conference and say, this is how we see things. It doesn't happen, you know, that one or another House member or senator or a couple will speak, or there'll be a news thing about, you know, Congress doing this or that. But what if you got outside and said, this stinks, it's bad, this is how we feel about it, this is what we think.
You know, well, let me address that. Just because you don't read about it or hear about it doesn't mean it isn't being done. It hasn't been done. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've been on the House steps with Nancy Pelosi where we're just decrying something about what Trump is doing, getting out of the Paris Accords, or advocating for something that many of us support, like the Green New Deal. So there's an enormous consensus within, at least on the Democratic side, about the urgency of this. And many of my colleagues are doing literally everything they can every step of the way. It's unbelievable in the Trump administration where you've got, you know, an EPA administrator, you know, Scott Pruitt when he was there, who doesn't believe in climate change. So, and we're competing against the Twitter power of the president. So I really do urge you to not conclude that because you don't hear it doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of us that are advocating, just like you say.
So what I think is that you gotta do more to get the attention. You need to get out, you know? You gotta do more so you are getting the attention of the press.
Well, I'll tell you, that's a real challenge. I mean, I'm in agreement with you, and I'd like, you know, if you could say, Peter, here's what you can do that would work. Yeah, and I've done that.
Could you talk just briefly about, because part of this issue is the media and how things are being recorded, and the difficulty it is to understand the difference between fake news and real news, and why some news gets buried and other news doesn't. And part of this is going on as part of the modern world that we live in. So talk a little bit about
Well, yeah, Angelo, both of us can talk about it, because I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But, you know, the news has changed so much from when I first ran for office in 1981. I was running for the state senate, but we had I think, half a dozen community newspapers in Windsor County. They're gone. We had a couple of daily papers that were widely read, and they're much weakened. And now social media is such a powerful tool that it was used by the Russians against us in our election. Trump denies it, right? But it's irrefutable. And the power of it was that they could identify people who were predisposed to essentially buy into a fake news narrative. And one of the most extreme examples was, remember that case of the report on social media that Hillary Clinton was running some child abuse scheme at a pizza place in Washington, and some guy came up here with guns to deal with it? So, you know, that's a huge challenge for democracy, because the traditional approach that we've had with the media, where there was some consolidation, was that the media played an editorial function. And sometimes I was frustrated, because it would be, we'd argue that it was biased if it wasn't particularly our point of view, but there would be some sifting between what were credible arguments and just fantasy. That's no longer the case. And we can't put the social media back in the bottle, but among other things, there's a question as to whether now institutions like Facebook should have the same responsibility that the Addison Independent has, where if you publish something that's just libelous, you will be sued. You've got some jeopardy. So it imposes some editorial duty. The Facebooks of the world have no such responsibility. They have no responsibility for anything that's put on their website, even though they are the ones that control what goes on it. So that's an area of reform that I think we need. Go ahead.
I noticed the lights came on. It came on for a reason. There's another function in the church at the 7.
It came on because it's getting dark.
Oh, it's also getting dark. But there's another function that we need to kind of wrap up. Is there anybody that has a question, hasn't asked one? Yes. Hang on. Microphone. We got 5 minutes, maybe. Is that right?
Well, thanks for your patience.
Thank you for being here. My question is really about what all of us can do. What is the most effective thing that we as citizens can do to impact what's going on in Washington at this point? What do you see as being the most effective?
Well, there's, you know, I get asked that question all the time. And here's the reality. There's something, you know, you've got me, Bernie, and Patrick down there, and we're basically with you. So, you know, sometimes they get complaints from Vermonters who come down to lobby us, and we start out with yes, right? You've been in that, yeah. So, in reality, contacting Ted Cruz, he's not going to particularly listen to you, all right? So, contact me, contact Bernie, contact Patrick. It means a lot to us to hear what you're saying and your criticism or suggestions of what we're doing, or saying we're doing the right thing. It's positive reinforcement, and we really appreciate that. And it kind of gives us some confidence that we are representing you. I don't think it's particularly helpful when you contact a Vermont or out-of-state person contacts another legislator. So how do you affect that is kind of tough. But on the other hand, are there things you can do with climate change in your own community? You know, all these energy action networks. Are there things in the local community health center? We've got some folks here who have been leaders on that. It makes a huge difference in the lives of people where you're standing up for that local institution. That really matters. Are there things you can do to help with Planned Parenthood that's under siege right now? I mean, there are things out there to do that make a difference and remind you of what's important. So I really believe that doing things locally is more important now than ever, because the response to globalization is going to be what we do here that's within our control. And that's going to, as I said earlier, that's, I hope, what's going to get us through what I think is a dark time, where the fundamental guardrails of democracy are under challenge, because we've got to get them back. But acting locally really makes a difference. And by the way, Vermont has got a real amazing reputation. It's not just because of our ice cream and cheese and beer, okay, in our town meetings. No, there's a respect for our value system in the urban and rural mix. And we've got to nurture that. So doing what you can in your own community, don't underestimate the importance of that, both for the community and for your own spiritual well-being. Thank you.
Actually, with Sunrise, that's a wonderful message to end on, and I think we have to leave. But what, quickly, Judy?
I just want to say one thing to end on, Jim. What you were saying about the middle class, I paid my estimated taxes today. I am so proud to be a Vermonter. I don't mind paying my money into Vermont. It's fine, I have no problem. But it makes me sick to pay my estimated tax into this current government. And maybe we could set something up where, I mean, I'd like to make all middle class people not pay their taxes at all, and then let these few wealthy corporate, see where the money really is coming from. But I know that's too strong. But why not set up something where we could earmark what we want to put our taxes toward, so we feel better about when this kind of thing is happening to our democracy?
Well, you got a bunch of people here, you can start organizing, see if you get some to join you. You know, how many in favor of having some rich person in New York pay your taxes? Judy, I'm with you.
Hey,
but I get it.
Thank you all. I think we do. There is another event here at 7, so a round of applause.
Thank you again, my colleagues, for arriving late. I really enjoyed this. This is great. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you all.